I think that the incredible lesson there is in life, oftentimes we want one foot on the cliff and one foot off the cliff. But to see outlier success like Nike has had, sometimes you just got to go all in.
Welcome to Beyond the Game, Wealth Mastery for Athletes. I'm Kris Benson, private equity real estate investor, and I'm joined by 9-year NFL vet Alec Ogletree. Beyond the Game is a podcast where we will provide a playbook for financial growth both on and off the field. Join us each week as we'll have in-depth conversations with other pro athletes as they walk us through how they've created wealth beyond the game, both on and off the field. They're going to share their triumphs, lessons learned, and setbacks along the way so that you don't make the same mistakes. Join us. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. Jacob Turner, appreciate you taking the time to joining us on Beyond the Game, Wealth Mastery for Athletes. Thanks for coming today.
Kris, I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, so here's where I want to start. There's a statistic out there that I'm sure you're aware of, and it was from Sports Illustrated. The article's old. I think it was from 2009, but essentially, I think the quote was 78% of NFL players became broke within 3 years of exiting the league, right? And so I, as a non-professional athlete, we're very judgy. We always are like, if I had $10 million, I had $100 million, I'd never do that. What are the things that you've seen either in your career as a professional baseball player or in your career as a financial advisor, the habits that those guys did that made them lose the money that potentially some of the normal people in the world are still doing today?
For me, there's really two things to think about. One, I've seen all those stats. I think they're almost a little bit flawed just because the reality is when we think of professional athletes as normal people, which is definitely how I consider myself, you think about these people that are on the front of ESPN, right? You think about Patrick Mahomes making $30 or $40 million a year. The reality is most professional athletes aren't earning $30 to $40 million a year. They might be making league minimum, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but $700,000 a year for maybe 2 or 3 years is a vastly different ball game than millions of dollars. Sure. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, I think it goes back to compounding. We always talk about compounding when we think about investing and money continuing to grow, but compounding works the other way when it comes to spending. One thing I see happen a lot with athletes is they get money and they immediately adjust to this new lifestyle of, I got the fancy car, I bought the nice house, I'm going to the nice dinner. And on top of that, I want all the people that helped me get here to come do the same thing. So they don't slowly build their lifestyle. They go from 0 to 100 with their lifestyle. And it's very hard to pull back that lifestyle. And that compounding of spending really starts to kick in, right? You buy a new house. It's not just the down payment on the house. It's the mortgage. It's the property taxes. It's the electrical bill. It's all the stuff that comes with maintaining that home. You buy a new car, that's a depreciating asset. And in 2 or 3 years, you're going to be in the locker room and somebody else is going to have the next new car. And you're going to say, I want that. So the compounding really works both ways. And I think it's so important for guys when they first get drafted or when they first get that big check to make sure that they start slow and really establish those good habits of saving more than your spending and making sure that you have this good foundation in place.
Yeah, I mean, Jacob, everything that you just said is applicable to every career-based human being on the planet, right? I mean, I think what you're describing is kind of lifestyle creep, right? You make more money, you spend more money, right? You get a nicer car, you get a nicer house, and that continues to ratchet up. The good news in most people's careers is it may make them married to their job the rest of their lives, but they probably have that income producing potential. Where in the professional athlete space, if you're lucky, right? Like Alec, who's not here today for people just listening, Alec is at the Super Bowl on Radio Row and ditched me. So it's just me. But what Alec was lucky to play 9 years in the NFL, had a fantastic career, made real money. Like you said, most guys are thousandaires. Most guys in the locker room are thousandaires, not Patrick Mahomes. And I think, what's interesting on our side is there's this judgment of, well, you'd lose your money, but most Americans spend more money than they make too. It's just at a whole nother level that I think we as sort of normal human beings have this judgment against, which, I think when you think about what you just said is basically spend more or spend less than you make, and be careful, like be thinking about what you can do day one. And the hard part, Jacob, and you know this more than anybody, you're 20, 22, right? Like I still make bad decisions. I'm 43. I mean, at 22, I made far less good decisions.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say that really adds to it, that multiplies the potential bad outcomes for athletes oftentimes, is you're in a locker room full of guys that are making 5 to 10 to 15 times what you're making. If you think about most people when they're young, they're really starting to climb up the corporate ladder, but they're not even in the meetings with the C-suite, and they're not day to day interacting with the CEO that might be making 10 times what they're making. As an athlete, you're sitting right across the locker room from the guy that's making 20 million bucks if you're making league minimum. And you're seeing the car that he's driving, and you're maybe going to dinner with them from time to time. So you're seeing this lifestyle all the time. And it almost feels like it's like this rite of passage. Well, everybody else is doing it, so maybe I should too.
Yeah. It's a hard, like you said, I don't pull into my office parking lot and see, Lambos and Ferraris on both sides of me. I mean, that keeping up with the Joneses in the professional athlete world, the Joneses are a whole nother level. Well, it's an interesting thought process that I think at Beyond the Game, we're trying to help people understand. And I think specifically with you, take me back to like that transitionary period for you. So look, you had an incredible career in Major League Baseball. I mean, you played in Major Leagues 9 years and then a little bit overseas.
Yep.
So, you were lucky relative to a lot of guys. You came out highly touted prospect out of St. Louis. Where in your mindset did you think in the beginning? Like when you were 21, 22, were you thinking, hey, I'm going to be the next 10-year guy in Major League Baseball? Or did you already have that head on your shoulders where you're thinking, all right, look, I have an opportunity to make life-changing money for a period of time. I'm going to do what I can do to compound those effects moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think every professional athlete, part of the reason why they got to where they're at is because they have almost a delusional self-confidence in their own abilities. So when I first got to the big leagues, I was like, I'm going to be here for the next 10 years. I'm going to be, a potential 20-game winner. And, at the time, Justin Verlander was the guy with Detroit. It was like, hey, if I could try to follow in his footsteps, that's what I want to do. Now, the reality of my career was certainly not like that. It wasn't this straight line trajectory up. And the reality was there was a lot more failures than there were successes. But I think that's also the hard part when it comes to the financial side. If you're projecting out this self-belief and you have this internal self-confidence that like, I can do this thing, sometimes you're like, well, I could spend the money that I made because I'm going to make more down the road. But the reality of professional sports is like, there's not a more cutthroat job out there. If I come in on Monday and I don't do my job on Tuesday, they could say like, Jacob, you're out. You didn't do the job on Monday. There's no performance improvement plan. In addition to that, if I do my job on Monday and I roll in on Tuesday and they say, you know what, I found somebody that was cheaper, they're going to get rid of me. There's no feelings in professional sports, right? This is a business.
Yeah, for sure. If you could go back and change it, would you have still done it?
Oh, 100%. I tell people this all the time. Look, like there's the behind the scenes of professional sports that people don't get to see. And I try to share a lot of that stuff online. But the ultimate reality is like being a professional athlete, in my opinion, is the greatest job in the world. I saw somebody post like they would rather own a small business than be a professional athlete. And I'm like, well, you're saying that because you've never been a professional athlete before. And look, like there's more stress that comes with it. There's more spotlight on you. But like there is nothing that I've found that gives you the same rush as walking out there in front of 50,000 people. Like if somebody else knows what that looks like, let me know. But you're essentially at this elite of elite stage and the world's eyes are on you. And it's awesome because it's what for me, it was what I dreamed of as a kid, right? So to see your dreams come true, I mean, I can't think of anything better. But look, the reality is there's a whole nother business side of it that when you're dreaming that as a kid, you have no idea what that looks like. And that part maybe isn't so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. We've been very fortunate on the podcast, talked to guys from a number of different leagues, but a lot of guys in the NFL. And my understanding, at least with Major League Baseball, is much of the contract or the contracts can be guaranteed, where in the NFL, you talk about cutthroat. man, that's a tough way to make a living in an environment where essentially you're getting run over by a truck every other play. It's the business side of what you guys do is not an easy thing to fathom. I mean, there are guys with stresses in their jobs and careers day to day for sure. But like you said, it's not always what Alec talks about on the podcast is cheaper, younger, faster, right? Like the GM of the team is always chasing, at least in the NFL, cheaper, younger, faster. In baseball, it can't be too much different.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, in baseball, I tell people all the time, like, I'm so thankful we have an incredible players union in Major League Baseball, and the guys that came before us paved the way for guys that are playing in the era I played in, the guys that are playing now, to have those guaranteed contracts. So like you mentioned, Kris, in baseball, I mean, essentially every contract is essentially fully guaranteed if it's a major league deal. So the minute you sign on that dotted line, you're getting the money, which as a professional athlete is oftentimes a huge sense of relief, because oftentimes you're getting paid for what you've been doing the past decade, right? So whether that's in high school or in college, you've been working your way up and then you sign your draft contract, like you're getting paid for future ability, but also like what you've been doing in the past. And I think it's one of the biggest things that I see, as I look at even on the financial side for us as we work with professional athletes, the difference between guys in the NBA versus guys in the NHL, guys in the NFL, guys in Major League Baseball, and then like how that flows to, the things that they should be thinking about in terms of managing their risk. In the NFL, a lot of these contracts aren't guaranteed, right? What you see on ESPN oftentimes is not actually getting paid out. So how can guys, start to manage their risk? Whereas in baseball, like I said, you get these fully guaranteed deals. A guy signs a $100 million deal, like he's getting that $100 million deal as long as he just continues to show up.
Yeah, agreed. And how did that translate, or I guess permeate into your career? Like Jacob, you mentioned it, you didn't have that straight line trajectory of, hey, I'm going to be the next Justin Verlander. You kind of bounced around a little bit across your career. You came out as a really highly touted first round draft pick. In your mind's eye, you had this kind of, I guess, irrational sense of confidence of who you were going to be. When did that start to shift for you, where you were starting to think, oh, I'm not going to be Justin Verlander, right? I mean, how did that, was there a moment for you?
Yeah, I think I posted about this on Twitter.
Quick thing on all of Jacob's social media. If you're not following him on LinkedIn, Twitter, I haven't seen your stuff as much on Instagram, Jacob, but it's really good. I really enjoy it.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. For me, I mean, it happened so fast, right? It was really years in the making, but for me, it felt like I woke up one day and I was like, man, this is not how I thought it was going to go. So to give, listeners a little bit of background, I signed it as an 18-year-old. I was a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. I got to the big leagues at 20, but the reality was by 25, I was essentially hanging on. I was essentially like, I don't know if I'm going to be in the big leagues tomorrow. I could get sent to AAA. In baseball, you could get what's called designated for assignment, which essentially means you get taken off the 40-man roster, which is not good. And it really happened what felt like overnight. It was a 5-year time period there, but I think that one of the biggest lessons that it taught me, and I think this is a lesson that anybody should take away, is, some of the best performers that I've seen in my life, whether it's business or sports or really anything, they have this ability to not only celebrate the wins, right? Like it's hard whenever you get those wins in your life, but they also have this almost this irrational fear that it could all be taken away from them tomorrow. So they're able to keep their foot on the gas all the time. I think Mark Cuban has this quote that he wants people in business to work like somebody's working 24 hours to take everything away from you. And that's, I think, what sports taught me. For better or worse, like it's really shaped the way that I've, built my second half of my career.
In what way? Like what were some of those habit stacks that you were putting together, either maybe during your playing career or that second half, or as you transitioned into, the next phase, which is, on the financial wealth management side of things?
When I was playing, I used to think that time was the cure-all for everything. So I got to the big league super fast, maybe had some struggles, but I thought, I see these guys that really develop in year 2 and 3. So time will allow me to develop. And look, I was putting in the work. I wasn't sitting around doing nothing, but I would say my sense of urgency, that dial, I feel like could have been turned up a little bit higher. And when I think about what I do now, and I think about the lessons I learned then, I mean, my urgency dial is always essentially at a 10 when it comes to what we're doing in our business. I'm always trying to think about what can we be doing better for clients? What can we be doing better as a business? Who are new people that we could potentially bring on that are going to be A players for us in the future? And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that like I had this career that at 20, I was like, I'll be the next Justin Verlander. And by 25, I was hanging on, and it felt like it went like that. And it's become just kind of part of who I am. I think, professional sports has taught me an incredible amount of life lessons that I think a lot of people don't get until they're later on in life. The way that I describe professional sports in general is like, if you play for 10 years, you're essentially getting life lessons that generally most people don't get for 30 or 40 years. And if you can condense those down and take the ones that are really valuable to you, they can make a huge impact on whatever your second act is post sports.
Yeah, I think the one that always stands out to me, and you just kind of hit the nail on the head, or two, I guess, is one, the accountability and performance, right? I mean, not everybody has those lessons coming out of school into the career, or into a career path. And then the urgency, but I almost think of that urgency as like a consistency. You're waking up every day, moving the ball forward. And, it can be just a little bit, but everything is essentially compounded efforts over time, right? And you know this from the investing side of things. The most important tool in investing is time, right? Like compounding interest is it, right? Just hit singles and doubles for 30 years and it's kind of be okay. Don't lose principal,
Yep.
Right? I mean, that's always the goal of it. And I think that's what people lose and athletes have is, when you got drafted in 2009, that was the previous 15 years of work, right? And you did a little bit every day and that's stacked. And that's why you got drafted top, as a top 20 draft pick. And I think as we kind of go into the world as in our careers, that's something that people lose is like, dude, it's a little bit every day. And 20 years from now, you'll see the benefits of it. I think that's one of those things that sport teaches, regardless of what level you're at.
Yeah. The analogy that I like to use is it's like hitting the piñata. When somebody's hitting a piñata, they don't know which swing is going to break the piñata. And oftentimes they might be on swing 5 or 6, and it might not be till swing 20 that it breaks the piñata, but it's showing up every single day and continuing to do that little thing, even when you're not seeing the immediate results of it, right? This is a show I'm sure a lot of investors listen to. And like we talk about delayed gratification, the idea that I'm going to do something today that is not going to give me any gratification today, but maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, it's going to be really successful. That's the way I think about everything that we do. And I think, that mindset combined with the sense of urgency can create incredible results because you're thinking about stuff on a really long-term time horizon. So you're willing to do stuff that other people aren't willing to do. But then when you combine that with a sense of urgency to show up every single day and actually get better and not say that the time is going to be the biggest factor in this, saying that my urgency multiplied by the time is going to create the results. You can see incredible benefits from that.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called Rebellious CEO. You ever read that?
I have not.
So Ralph Nader, my dad actually sent me the book, but he profiles 12 CEOs that he believes have sort of redefined the role in a variety of different industries. And last night I was reading before bed, and the guy who started Patagonia, and I'm going to butcher his name. I think it's Jan Shornard.
Oh, he's got a great story.
Yeah, his story is incredible. But one of the things that he built into the Patagonia mission was make decisions today like Patagonia is going to exist for the next 100 years, right? And so all of those fundamental decisions on how they built the business, and I think how his employees conduct themselves, have this filter of, but how's that going to look for us in 20 years? And I think that horizon changes, your perspective of how you make decisions. And it's so easy to get in the decision where you're just looking at what's right in front of you versus, the 20 years. So I love that thought process of, kind of the urgency and compounding. I'll tell one more quick story, Jake, because you'll like it. Is I have a buddy whose kid was a really good soccer player, still is. But as a child, he was probably 6 or 7. I asked how his soccer game went that weekend, and his dad was like, "Great, he scored like 8 goals." I was like, "What do you mean he scored 8 goals? This is soccer. Like they don't score any goals." He's like, "Well, my kid's really good." He's like, "Here's what we do. Every night I spend another 10 minutes of dribbling." He's like, "So at the end of the week, we only do it 5 nights a week. We don't do it on the weekend." He's like, "So at the end of the week, my kid's got 50 minutes more of dribbling than every other kid on his team. He's like, and at the end of the year, you multiply that by 52 weeks, he's got 2,500-ish more minutes of dribbling than every kid on his team. He's like, and eventually that's going to compound to incredible talent. And that kid ended up playing D1 soccer. And, like you said, it's just, you just stack. You're just stacking on top of it.
Yeah, people completely underestimate what you can do just by doing little things over and over again. And I think that's an incredible example when you think about sports. Even professional sports, people look at what they do, what an athlete does when they show up on the game on a random Wednesday. But what they don't see is all the tedious work that they did to make that one great play that you saw, to make that one pitch when the bases were loaded, to connect for the home run that's a walk-off home run. They don't see all the extra reps that went into them having the opportunity to potentially perform at that level.
Yeah, and you get, like Eminem said, you get one shot sometimes.
Yep.
Jacob, so talk to me about your foundational of financial education coming into the league. How was money discussed around the kitchen table when you guys had dinner with your family? Like what was that in your household growing up?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. My dad owned a small business. My mom had an accounting background, so numbers and finances and money were somewhat discussed. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from my parents was, my parents we lived a good lifestyle, but we lived vastly below our means. But I'll never forget, and I think it was 2007, 2008, when the market really started to turn, we used to have a cash drawer. In this cash drawer, my mom would put money in the drawer that was essentially for like extracurricular spending. So my dad always loved to take us out to dinner, but my mom was always like saying, like, we can only spend this much. So what she did was she would put cash in this drawer on Monday. And if it was gone by Sunday and my dad wanted to go out to dinner on Sunday, it was like, hey, there's no more cash in the drawer. I can remember asking them, like, do we not have any money? And they're like, no, we're fine. But like, this is how essentially like how we're budgeting for right now. Like, the world is kind of in this state of flux. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. So I had some really good upbringing, really good lessons from them. And then when I first signed, essentially I just thought, I just don't want to be on 30 for 30 broke. So what can I do to not be on that? And I think athletes go one of two ways. They either spend everything or they spend nothing. And they, getting good advice helps you spend somewhere in the middle. I went the other way where I essentially just didn't spend anything, which, looking back, reflecting on it, I joke with people, I'm like, I'm the best market timer of all time. I signed in 2009, started investing right away. So that part was great. But the reality is money's a tool, right? And if we worked really hard for it, like we should be rewarding ourselves. We should be spending on things that bring us joy in our lives.
Yeah, if for anybody listening, or you, Jake, if you hadn't read Die with Zero, it's an incredible thesis on the utility of money. But when you're 22, you're not thinking about what's going to happen when you die, at least most people. So when you came out that immediate to investing, I mean, you say you spend nothing. Did you have an advisor who was saying, hey, put your checks here, we're going to take care of them for you?
Yeah, essentially what I did was I actually just set up like direct deposit to my brokerage account. And I would just get a little bit of money from my brokerage account every month that I could spend, which, looking back on it, in the way that we do it with our athletes now, is like I always separate out the brokerage account and their cash account because, the easy example I give is if a guy's, budgeting to spend $5,000 a month and he's got $1 million sitting in a brokerage account and he spends $7,000 that month, he's not really going to feel it. But
Sure.
if he has $15,000 or 3 months of living expenses in his cash account and he spends $7,000 that month, he's going to feel it when he looks at that bank account. So, I had some people around me. I don't know if I had the best people around me right at the beginning, but I think it's all a learning process.
Yeah, for sure. What were some of those lessons? Like as you matured into your, I guess, investment maturity, was the initial thought, when you say brokerage account, I mean, is somebody placing equities for you? Are you just investing like index fund type of strategies? I mean, at that point, I assume you kind of hands off and, hey, somebody else is moving the money around, or maybe you were.
Yeah, no, I had a team around me that was helping me with it. And, I would say on really simple terms, we had a pretty diversified portfolio. I think some of the lessons I learned was, one, how important the planning side is. The group that I originally was using was more investment focused, and like the investments are really important. But the reality is, especially as an athlete, one of the things that we focus on in our business a ton is tax planning. Taxes are these athletes' biggest lifetime expense. And there's so much that you can do when you're making the money initially to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to keep as much in your pocket as possible. And the second thing I would say is, I realize that finding specialized advice gives you a lot better results. One of my biggest gripes with the wealth management industry as a whole is a lot of times it's very general advice.
Sure.
If you think about what advisors do, they say, if you have a certain amount of money, you'd be a good client. And essentially what they're saying is, if you can pay me enough money, I'll take you on as a client. But the reality is that going to give you the best advice? If you're a retiree versus a professional athlete versus a key executive, we all have different complexities. We all have different nuances in terms of what's going on. And making sure that you're getting specialized advice is something that I I learned the hard way.
What? Wait, you can't just leave us on the cliffhanger with that. What was the hard way? That was like a good tease. If we were going into a commercial, we would say,
well, look, when I think about specialized advice, I'll give some specific examples to baseball. When you first get called up to Major League Baseball, in the minor leagues, there's no 401k. That's hopefully changing with the new collective bargaining agreement. But nobody was giving me any guidance on the fact that, like, when I got called up to the big leagues, now all of a sudden I got to contribute to a 401k that's through Major League Baseball. In addition to that, as long as I sign up for it, right, and I do things the right way, the team's also going to contribute after-tax dollars to it. So I didn't even know any of that, right? My advisor didn't know any of that. When I think about, my wife and I were very charitably inclined. I made a post today about donor advised funds. Donor advised funds is a tool that, especially when you're in a really high income tax bracket for a given year, can be really advantageous for giving away money. Essentially, it allows you to give more money to your favorite charity and less money to the IRS. A great tool for somebody that's charitably inclined and making a lot of money. And, my advisor had never brought that up to me. When I got done playing with Major League Baseball, if you have more than 4 years of service time, you can stay on their healthcare plan. But if you stay on their healthcare plan, they have 3 different options. They have, basically an active plan, a buy down plan, and then essentially a very high cost plan. I didn't have any of the nuances to understand what those plans were. And the group that I was working with, they didn't work with professional baseball players, so they didn't even know that was an option. So it's things like that over time, we talked about compounding earlier in this conversation, start to really make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's what you just said is hard too, because you don't know yet what you don't know. Right? I mean, at 25, 26, 27, you're just starting to get your feet under you. And like you said, if you don't have the advisor or somebody holding your hand through that, and to your point, and what you guys do now with the specialization specifically for professional athletes, if somebody doesn't have that background, like if you came to me and said, Kris, what should I do? I don't know. I'd tell you what I do, but I wasn't a professional athlete. I mean, that's the hard part about it. In your world today, what are the things, like, I guess, foundationally that you wish, if Jacob Turner of today could go back and advise Jacob Turner of 25, like, what are some of the foundational steps, other than spend less money than you make? What are some of the foundational steps you'd put in place for yourself?
The biggest thing that I wish I would have seen, and what we do for guys now, is when they're initially getting money, I will map out, if we stick to whatever plan we put in place in terms of spending versus saving, and we can earn a really solid rate of return over a really long period of time, here's what this money looks like for you. Okay.
What do you use as that, Jacob? What's your number? What's the assumption you guys say when you talk about a rate of return?
Yeah. I mean, one, hashtag this is not financial advice. Compliance won't let me say that. And two, I'm going to give you the best worst answer I have, Kris. It depends, right? The reality is returns vastly differ based on how much risk a client is willing to take and how much risk they need to take. So, they can range all the way across the board. What I think is more important is for clients to understand, what is a potential distribution rate from their nest egg, right? If they have $1 million, how much could they potentially spend off that? And what is potentially either the gap that they have, or maybe they don't have any gap between what that distribution rate could be in post-career and what they're spending. Because the ultimate goal is, if you get done with your baseball career, you get done with your football career, and you have enough saved that it matches whatever your lifestyle is over here, you have the ultimate flexibility. You can go into whatever you want with your next career, right? You can take your time, you can figure out what that's going to be. You can do something that's around your passion. You could go start a business because you have essentially an unlimited financial runway.
How many guys that you work with know that burn rate? So I would consider burn rate, you're talking about lifestyle expense, but ostensibly how much it costs them to live on a monthly basis. How many guys know?
I mean, the guys that work with us know what they're spending. But I'll speak for the guys that have come in that we've talked to. I mean, the reality is most people don't, because, they've never been tracking it, and you don't need to be tracking it down to every single last dollar that goes out for the Starbucks coffee you bought for your wife. But it is really important to understand, hey, what are my fixed costs? Okay. What are the things that I can't really tweak these, right? And the biggest fixed cost that essentially everybody has is their living expenses. If you buy a house and I say your house costs too much money, we need to get rid of it, we can't just flip the switch off, walk out the door, collect the check, and move on to the next thing. There's going to be big costs involved with potentially selling it, getting it on the market. It's going to take time. That's a fixed cost, right? The cost that it incurs every single month for you to live there is key. And I think the biggest thing is just understanding, even if it's just a ballpark, am I spending $10,000 a month? Am I spending $15,000 a month? Am I spending $30,000 a month? What I've seen time and time again is guys vastly underestimate what they're spending. They think they're spending 15 and turns out they're spending 30, or they think they're spending 20 and they're saying, but those expenses I have for my kids' school, those don't count for that, right? And it's really important to understand that, like, hey, every dollar that's going out, that counts.
Do you recommend a tool? Like personally, like I use Quicken, and every Sunday I go back through and Quicken, and hey, this is what I spent this week. And it's fascinating. I think you probably do it inherently, but it's fascinating to go back and just look at what you've spent money on. And Quicken does a nice job of creating some reporting and graphical representations of that. But is there a tool that you recommend for guys to start, implementing that to do that tracking?
Yeah, I'll speak. I mean, personally, I use a tool called Monarch Money, which has been awesome. I used to use a tool called Mint, which got bought by somebody here recently and switched to Monarch Money. Monarch's been great. It's very similar to like Quicken or QuickBooks. A lot of times for our clients, especially at the beginning, we're trying to get a big ballpark on what they're doing. And I mentioned earlier, always making sure that we have separation between the brokerage account and what we call the cash account. And then what we can do is we can go in that cash account and be able to see, okay, here's kind of what the expenses look like from a big picture standpoint. And if we were shooting for, $3,000 to $4,000 a month when they first signed that they're spending, and they're spending $6,000, we can then drill down and say, hey, what is the extra $3,000 a month coming out for? But if we're around that ballpark, give or take a couple $100, then, I don't see the need to make sure that we're drilling down to every last dollar. But personally, I use Monarch. We also have a tool in our business, a financial planning tool called Right Capital that we use to help clients.
Jake, we didn't really get to this, but what was the transition from the end of baseball to financial advising, or wealth management? What physically happened, and how did that transition take place for you?
Yeah, I've always loved personal finance. So, my mom had the accounting background. When I first signed, I probably read more personal finance books than anybody. I mean, I was reading books on investing when I was playing just to better understand what was I investing in. It led me to essentially ask every advisor that I had. I would just pepper them with a million questions about why I was doing what I was doing and what they would do with their own money and all these things. And I knew when I got done, I wanted to do something to educate guys around money, around personal finance. I wasn't sure I wanted to become a financial advisor. I think financial advisors have a very negative connotation for good reason. And frankly, I wasn't always the biggest fan of financial advisors. So I thought, what better way for me to help than to become a financial advisor? And, that journey was interesting because what I did, Kris, was I essentially went around and I interviewed everybody that was quote unquote successful, that was take my call or go to lunch with me, that was around money and finance, from real estate to private equity to investment banking to wealth management to family offices, to better understand, okay, out of all these kind of different spectrums that it comes to finance, what area do I like the most? And what area do I want to mesh a potential work-life balance in the future? So originally I thought I wanted to go into investment banking, and then realized, these hours are crazy and financially, I wasn't in a position where I needed to do that. So I thought, okay, that's probably out. And ultimately, I ended up working for a company that was here in St. Louis. That's a multifamily office. I worked there for 6 months. And essentially, my pitch to the CEO was, you don't really need to pay me. I just want to come in and understand the ins and outs of this business. I think this is what I want to do long term. I think you guys have a great business. You guys have a great company. I would love to learn the insides of this business from you guys, and we can kind of reconvene in 6 months and see if this fits long term.
What do you say?
He took me up on it. Turns out finding good employees that'll work for free is a great deal.
I have two boys, Jacob, 18 and 22. And I've always said, look, just go offer, my 22-year-old especially is, kind of he's starting his career, is find the guy or gal that you want to be, at least for right now, right? And that changes. I think this too. I mean, you're still young, but 30-year-old Jacob's going to think different than 40-year-old Jacob and 50-year-old Jacob. And my pitch has always been, just go offer time. Like if you come to me and say, hey, Kris, we do private equity real estate, specifically in self-storage, Jacob. And if you say, hey, I want to learn the self-storage business, I'll come work you 20 hours a week for free. What am I going to say? Yep. No. And I think you guys as professional athletes have access, right? Everybody wants to talk to you, especially when you're playing, right? I mean, if you were in Detroit your first few years in, a highly touted draft pick, and you pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm Jacob Turner, I'm the Detroit Tigers first round draft pick, I'd love to come meet with you. They're going to be like, great, come on.
Oh, 100%, man. If I could go back and do it all over again, the Rolodex I would have would be even better.
Yeah, I think the thing that we've learned too in the podcast and the interviewing is you have to be intentional in that ask, right? What can you bring to them while you are still relevant in the sports world? And people are going to take you up on it. They're going to let you in. They want to help.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is, I think one trap that athletes particularly can fall into is they think that because I was successful at something, somebody else is just going to want to give me a job, right? I won a World Series or whatever it may be, and they're going to want me on the team. But what they want is they want value, right? If they're running a business, they want to know, like, okay, I understand that you were good at that, and maybe you have some connections that could benefit us, but tell me why, right? Even if I'm going to come work for free, I think about some of the people that we have brought on as 1099s in our business, and one of the guys helps us with some of our video content. And one of the things that he did was, not only did he reach out, but he was like, I'll essentially work for free for the first 2 weeks. I'll cut all the videos. I'll show you what I can do. And if we both agree after 2 weeks that I'm good enough at this, then you'll hire me. How about that? I was like, I mean, that's an incredible offer, right? I'll take 2 weeks of free videos. And if you're not good, hey, we just agreed that you had to be good for this to work.
Yeah. I got a Google Drive full of edited videos that I'm taking with me.
Yep.
So how did that transition from that role at the multifamily office to Moment Wealth, where you guys are now, and as a co-founder?
Yeah, so I worked there for 6 months, realized that I love the inside of the business. I love the relationships. I love the people side. I love helping to educate people. I enjoy sharing my own personal experiences. I think I take a very unique approach as an advisor. Oftentimes with clients that we work with, I share exactly what I'm doing. The way I describe it is they're essentially getting financially naked in front of us. And if I'm not, or our advisors aren't willing to get financially naked in front of them, then how are we having a actual dialogue? What I realized though was, one, I'm not the best employee. I'm very entrepreneurial, and I didn't really realize that at the very beginning, but I definitely realized that going through the 6-month process of working there. And two, I really felt like I wanted to help a specific group of people. Not only I felt like my skill set was meant to help that group of people, but when I think about personal finance, Kris, I think about it as everything is so inherently personal, right? We can make a decision on a spreadsheet or a Google Doc, but the reality is that decision, just because the X's and O's match up, doesn't mean that it's right for you in your life. Because the way that you think about money, how money shaped you, your viewpoints on it are going to be different than my viewpoints on it. I wanted to make sure that I worked with a group of people that I felt like I had walked in their shoes. So when they came to me and they said, here's what I'm thinking, even if it doesn't match on that spreadsheet, I could say, you know what, I understand where you're coming from, and I think that could make sense to potentially explore.
And how is that translated to what, or maybe a good overview of what Moment Wealth is? I mean, obviously you guys are working with professional athletes. What level? Just wealth management? Sounds like you're doing some tax planning as well.
Yeah, so we really work as essentially a virtual family office for professional athletes and high growth entrepreneurs. So we're covering everything from their cash flow planning, both personally in the business, to tax planning, to their estate planning, making sure that we're getting that implemented, to risk management strategies from life insurance to property and casualty insurance, building out the investment portfolio. And then oftentimes for a lot of the athletes we work with, we help them build out the team of A players around them. So that might be their CPA, their estate planning attorney, their insurance agent. And then we're coordinating with that entire team. And oftentimes for a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with, they're really hitting a different level in their business. And they're saying, you know, the CPA that I had when I first started 10 years ago is a great guy, but I might have outgrown him. Do you have other people that we should potentially interview and talk to?
Yeah, for those of you guys not familiar with virtual family office, think of it as they're the quarterback, right? I mean, you guys are building the foundation for all things finance, tax planning, estate planning, and everything runs back to a singular entity or team so that, you know, ostensibly you guys can have a picture of, or have a full picture of that athlete or that person's particular financial situation. I love that model.
I think it's a great way to explain it. The reason why I would say we basically built the model based on what my experiences were as a client and what I felt like was valuable. So when I was sitting on the other side of the table as a client, there were certain things on the investment side that I thought were valuable, but I also had a really good understanding of what I wanted to do. So a lot of times those conversations were very mutual. One of the things that I did think was extremely valuable was making sure that I had one point of contact as the complexities start to grow in my life. My wife's super sharp with money, but the reality is, like, she's not the day-to-day, she's not in the weeds of the money like I am. And if something ever happened to me, I wanted to make sure that we had one point of contact that was like, hey, I know where the trust is. I know what it says. We can get it executed. I know what the insurance documents say. I know where the investments are. I know what the strategy is, where it's all housed in one place that somebody can say, like, the train stays on the proverbial tracks.
Yeah, so important. And not just for professional athletes, right? I mean, you know, a guy asked me a question once that really stuck with me was, does your wife know your password manager password? He's like, and if she doesn't, it's because you don't think you're ever going to die. And I was like, good one, right? Like that's one of those things where you're like, yeah, what does she need to know all this stuff for? So I think that the kind of long-term planning, and it's hard to do when Jacob, you're still young, 32, right? I'm 43. I'm a little bit older, but I still think I'm relatively invincible. Maybe not as invincible as I thought I was when I was 30, but it's so important to have that long-term plan. I'm going to land the plane with two questions. Number one, you have Shoe Dog on the shelf behind you, which is one of my favorite entrepreneurial books. And I'll tell you, after you tell me, I'll tell you what the lesson was I took out of that. But you put it on the shelf. You got a lot of books back there. Why did you highlight Shoe Dog?
You know what's incredible about Shoe Dog? So for people that don't know, Shoe Dog's the story of Phil Knight starting Nike and growing it. But one of my biggest takeaways from Shoe Dog was they had essentially built a really solid business and then essentially kept going all in to continue to grow it. And I don't know how many years they were in, a decade into building this business. And essentially, like, if they didn't get this meeting with an overseas supplier, they were going out, right? And he just flies there, no meeting scheduled, just like, I'm going to go, like, I got to go all in. And I think that the incredible lesson there is, in life, oftentimes we want one foot on the cliff and one foot off the cliff. But to see outlier success like Nike has had, sometimes you just got to go all in.
It's a good lesson, Jacob. Burn the boats, right? If you're going to take the island, you got to burn the boats. The one that stood out for me in that book, it's eerily similar to what you just said. But what struck me was, and I don't know if you remember in the book, but there's the chapter ends with they take Nike public. And at the bottom, Phil Knight says, and I was worth $180 million, something like that. It ends similar to that. And this was like in the mid 80s. They had Jordan signed. Like, Nike was a thing at this point, right? This wasn't like the beginning of Nike. But what was so striking to me about it was the week before, they almost didn't make payroll. Like, they were so bootstrapped, and to your point, pushing that forward. It was crazy to me that Nike in the 80s, right? Jordan, like that era of Nike, was still right on the precipice of utter destruction, right? I mean, you don't make payroll. Yeah. I don't want to say it's over, but it's pretty over. And then, you know, they took the company public, and now Nike is who Nike is. But that was always the thing to me, is you don't understand the angst and the challenges with growing a business Like, you think Nike, you're like, they must have been crushing it forever. I mean, Phil Knight was worrying about were they going to be able to pay their secretary that week, which to me is always crazy.
Yeah.
It's a
So
great
Brett
book.
B. Short, who's an incredible entrepreneur, has this line that all small businesses are loosely functioning disasters. And I think that's true not only for small businesses, but also for large businesses, because people think that everybody's got it figured out, but it's just a bunch of humans trying to make the next best move.
Jacob, he's probably going to be pissed that I tell this story, but I have a buddy who worked for Booz Hamilton as a consultant for many years, traveled all over the world, consulted with some of the largest businesses that you and I know. This particular company, and the name will remain nameless, did about $500 million in revenue a year. $500 million. You know why they brought his company in from a consulting group perspective? All of their financials were done in Excel. The entire company globally, a $500 million organization. He said that once a month, they would send this spreadsheet around to all the global heads of the business, and everybody would fill out their section. And in China, the spreadsheet was so big and they had bandwidth restrictions that they couldn't email the spreadsheet. So they would download it onto a thumb drive and then FedEx it back to I'm not going to say where the corporate office was. This was a publicly traded company doing $500 million a year. And I was like, what? If only the investors knew.
That doesn't surprise me. That's crazy.
Well, all right. Last question. I appreciate you being so gracious with your time. So put yourself in 21-year-old you shoes, and 32-year-old you comes, right? You're 32?
Yep.
32-year-old you sees you. You guys go and have dinner. What are the things you're telling you?
I'd just say enjoy the journey. So many people get so caught up in like what they think the destination is going to be. As an athlete, it's getting to the highest level or getting to the next level. You go from high school to college to professional to hopefully the highest level professional. And then you get there and you realize I'm still living the same life. I'm still the same person. And look, it's incredible. But oftentimes we don't spend time reflecting on the journey, because the stories that you tell when it's all over are oftentimes the stories that at the times when you were going through them felt like the biggest struggles, and you were like, why am I going through this? But those are the stories you tell because those are the lessons that you learned along the way. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have enjoyed the journey more. And that's one thing that I've tried to do building our business. We're 3 years into this. Lord willing, we'll be doing this for the next 30 years. And I'm very cognizant that, look, every day isn't perfect. But in 30 years, I hope I can look back and say, man, I can remember back in 2024 when this thing happened. And, I thought it was a really big deal then, but now look where we're at.
You almost missed payroll. That's going to be your story. I almost missed payroll that year, and then I was worth $180 million.
Yep,
Jacob Turner, true pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time with us on Beyond the Game. Where can people find you? I know I mentioned your social media is great. List a few of those handles off. We'll make sure that gets put in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I post on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all under the Jacob Turner. I think Instagram has maybe an underscore with it. And then you can find our company, Moment Private Wealth, at momentprivatewealth.com.
Awesome. Jacob, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Kris.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Game. Please like, subscribe, comment on your favorite platform. It helps others find the show.